A few years back, I completed the most grueling video I ever made. It was about Marvel Zombies. As comments piled up on that video over time, many of them mentioned the equivalent series from DC Comics called DCeased. A series I had actually glanced over before I had a YouTube channel. Despite having my stomach turned by my Marvel Zombies experience, I decided to take another look at the series and discovered that it had been completed in the time that I had been away. I also was bolstered by the fact that in general, I find that DC Comics operate on a higher level of quality than Marvel Comics. Don't kill me, it's just my experience and my personal preference, I guess. So I read everything, and it was an amazing experience. This is a review for the entire series with not really any restraint on spoilers. It's an assessment, and I will try to refrain from constantly comparing it to Marvel Zombies, but that's pretty hard not to do, and it's probably why most of you are here anyway, if we're being honest. The first volume introduced a virus that plausibly infected the majority of Earth in no time. By plausible, I mean within context of the DC universe. It spreads initially through screens, primarily mobile devices, television. I really appreciate from the get-go that the writers seem to understand that a standard zombie virus wouldn't be much of a threat to the DC universe. They even specifically point out that the undead aren't focused on eating flesh, but are mainly driven to spread the virus. I mean, Superman alone could pretty much end most zombie threats. If Leon Kennedy can do it, Superman can certainly do it. This method of infection also allows characters that would normally be immune or else highly resistant to get infected and become a threat without just getting overwhelmed. I do have a massive complaint, though, with the treatment of Aquaman. For some reason, they had him getting overwhelmed by a bunch of ordinary infected when his strength level is one of the highest in the DC universe, and later he gets finally killed with what seems to be an ordinary arrow through the eye. I don't buy that. I mean, I'm pretty sure his eyes are resistant to the crushing depths of the ocean, but whatever. But on the inverse, I like how a lot of the non-powered characters like the Bat Family and the Joker got taken out immediately. It emphasized that characters with powers are going to be the key to fighting off something like this, and also set the stakes really high. Immediately you feel like just no one is safe in this story. That being said, no one felt brushed under the carpet. I think that's because the heroes went out as the best version of themselves, and there's usually a moment of silence once they've passed. Except for poor Aquaman, for some reason. And already I was comparing this a lot to Marvel Zombies, where there just seems to be no correlation between power levels and who lives and who dies. After all, grittiness is not a superpower. I also loved seeing certain villains join the heroes and kind of become the best versions of themselves. In the first volume, there was notably Lex Luthor, Poison Ivy, and Harley Quinn, who seemed to be having a wonderful time in spite of all the horror, but that's very in character. And this was such a far cry from that scene in Marvel Zombies where Fisk is saying that the old conflicts don't matter, all that matters is the fight between the living and the dead, and then Frank just did something unbelievably stupid. The best thing is the characterizations still feel very on point. Like, of course, Lex Luthor can understand why it's important to work with the heroes, but he's still very insufferable. It also made sense that they would need Lex's help because Batman getting killed early on means that he's now basically one of the smartest people in the world, so that was neat how that achieved more than one thing, setting up stakes that we're now going to be worried about the characters, and also explaining why they're putting up with Luthor later in the story. Coming back to the use of powers, that the powerful characters have a much higher chance of surviving than the non-powered or less powered characters, and it was great seeing these powerful characters use their powers intelligently, especially Superman, who constantly uses his X-ray vision so that he doesn't accidentally spot a TV screen or a mobile phone somewhere and get infected. There's a scene where he uses his super speed to clear out a bunch of infected from the Daily Planet, which was also very sad at the same time. And later he uses his super speed to intercept the Flash rather than try to outrun him, which cleverly avoids answering the age-old question, who is the fastest man alive? It's Barry. In general, except for the aforementioned Aquaman, the powers were very consistent, and this was the same across all of the volumes, which I really like that. For me, consistency is always an important thing, whether it's characters or powers or world building, other world building elements. And in comics, this often is something that falls short, and it constantly fell short and was disappointing in Marvel Zombies. But here, it was one of the highlights. It was always well done, because we've got characters that have no powers, characters that have powers and are way better than an average person, but they're not super powerful, and then we have godlike characters like Wonder Woman and Superman and the Spectre, and it was just great seeing that consistently handled for the whole series. Otherwise, if you don't want to do that, why would you even be writing a superhero story? At least, in my mind, having an eye on that is a big draw of the genre. If you saw my Marvel Zombies video, you may remember that I said I dislike the punchline or bleak endings of so many post-apocalyptic stories that are out there. And the first volume of DCeased kind of plays with this, where there's this twist ending where Cyborg may have had the ability to end the infection, but now everyone's already left Earth. So it feels like a cruel twist ending, but then the story had a little epilogue after that, so even though it sort of has this cruel twist, it doesn't leave you there. So it doesn't just feel like a slap in the face like so many zombie movies and Marvel Zombies volumes so often did. And we're still left with hope for the future at the end of the first story. A Good Day to Die was funnier than the first volume, and sometimes that annoyed me. But it really pulled things together at the end, and it was the first time that we really saw the heroes fighting with the infected en masse. I'm not sure I buy Big Barda and Mr. Miracle getting overwhelmed by hordes of ordinary infected, although Mr. Miracle does come back later in Dead Planet, so I guess that's kind of nullified. It was a good read, with a focus on Constantine deciding to get involved in our main hero's struggle against his better judgment. And on a side note, I love that once Dr. Fate and Zatanna show up at the climax of this one, the infected just become a minor annoyance. And I love, again, here's that power scaling where these are godlike characters. Dr. Fate has a ludicrous power level, and so does Zatanna. So once they show up, it's just, okay, this is in the pocket now. And I really love that. I was always waiting for moments like this in Marvel Zombies, and there's just so few and far between. Like, Luke Cage is invulnerable. How did this guy become a zombie? Okay, this isn't a rant video, I promise. But Unkillables. Right off the bat, I could tell I was going to love this. It starts with Slade Wilson getting infected, but then it fast forwards to when his body, his healing factor, fights off the infection. And now he goes on a whole new adventure, and this is the kind of thing that I wish we had seen with characters that have healing factors like Wolverine in the Marvel Zombie stories, which they generally just have him get infected because they want to have zombie Wolverine, and again, I complained about this before. So at the beginning of this, it's like, yeah, this is why I want a story with Deathstroke, is to see how his particular power set would give him an advantage. You know, he doesn't exactly have super strength to a great degree or anything like this, but he does have this healing factor, so right away, I was hooked on this. And just everything about this one was perfect. It was so cool seeing all of these villains turn into actual heroes. And it was very heartwarming because every step of it felt very earned. And the way the story concluded and tied together so many threads from previous volumes was just very rewarding. And I just love these big full-page spreads where they introduce characters and have a bunch of little tidbits about them. It's a comic book thing. But this one was particularly good because we have Bane reading a book. And later he's talking about the downfall of humanity and stuff. Finally, the writers remember that Bane is really intelligent, and not just there because he's strong, which is ironic because the little tag for him is that he's the muscle, so they're very observant there about the true nature of this character. I feel like that version from Batman and Robin has had a little too much authority in our perception of this character, but not here, so that's amazing. By the way, that monologue from Savage about tree lobsters is actually true. By the time I reached Hope at World's End, I realized that everything had been written by Tom Taylor, and it really shows. He maintains the continuity of this increasingly complex narrative very carefully. Another complaint I always had with Marvel Zombies were plot threads would disappear and the continuity was all over the place. There's even things where characters are infected in some stories but not in later, and just stuff like this. But here there's a single creative voice telling one unified narrative. Hope at World's End was almost an anthology series about Jimmy Olsen documenting the battle against an unliving army led by Black Adam, while also taking time to show other characters dealing with the crisis, as in issue 8. I particularly enjoyed issue 3, where Wally West, Max Mercury, Bart and Jesse Quick evacuate a bunch of civilians to an alternate dimension. Growing up in the 90s, I hardly knew about Barry Allen, because Wally West was the Flash at the time. So it was cool seeing these characters have their own little side story here. Very nostalgic for me, even though I acknowledge Barry is the Flash. All in all, Hope at World's End was a very satisfying read, and it fills out several blanks, such as how Martian Manhunter got infected. It highlighted the difference between certain characters like Lex Luthor and Superman, even during the apocalypse. My one complaint is I wish they had stuck with the darker art style. This one had a more cartoonish look, but the writing remains solid, so I'm not going to be picky about this. Also, this run was from 2020, and they were these very amusing full-page pictures at the end advising people to stay inside, which I found rather amusing. Dead Planet. I certainly can't complain about the art this time, and this one brought together a lot of threads from earlier. Whether it was fellow survivors finally meeting up, having their stories linked together, or thematic elements like how Superman never wanted to kill the infected in case a cure was found. And on a side note, it's always nice to see Rory Regan, the Ragman. I'd like to take a second and brag about having a copy of the second issue of Ragman. It's old, but I'm very happy to have it. And Swamp Thing also made an appearance. I also have a very old issue of Swamp Thing as well, and seeing them team up made my inner child very satisfied, even though it was a short-lived team-up. And again, I couldn't help but compare to seeing how these guys got sent off to how Marvel often handles the deaths of heroes in their Marvel Zombies or Old Man Logan, and this just felt so much more meaningful. Again, we have a little send-off. They're not just dead and that's it, forgotten. There's some poetic words, something like this, something to latch onto. It's not just shock value. Except for Aquaman for some reason. And again, here we have a conversation with Mr. Miracle making his return, and Constantine, the appearance of the statue from the end of The Unkillables, just making everything feel very connected, and showing how good it is to have one writer with a vision and an eye on continuity and characterization. And here again, the characters made good use of their powers. I particularly enjoyed when Dr. Fate linked the minds of Cyborg, Swamp Thing, Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, Wally West, Mary Marvel, Detective Chimp, and Batman, because he's Batman. Those little bits of humor were so well placed as well. Another thing I liked by this point is that no one character was going to be the key to everything in any given story. Each story gives the different characters, their chance to shine. For a while in this volume, I thought maybe Constantine was getting a little too much help, doing a little too much, but in the end, I don't feel like that was really true. It's sort of his moment to shine, but there's still more conflict after this, and dealing with Trigon is something that's right up his alley anyway. And I mean, John gets in there and does some awesome stuff too, so I wouldn't say that I'd say that the series is very free from the sort of author bias that I again see so often in Marvel Zombies, where Logan usually is too important, or ironically not important enough because his healing factor should give him an advantage. I don't know, I felt this was very free from that. I didn't feel like, even though Aquaman got written out of this too easily, I felt that all the characters were handled well. And of course, this volume featured the moment that we're kind of waiting for in a story like this, where the heroes actually manage to undo the infection. The bleak sort of punchline ending from the first volume gets undone. And I mean, this is why I personally come to superhero fiction, is for this kind of moment. I didn't feel like it undermined the threat either, because it's also not over yet. War of the Undead Gods. Right away, this story brings in characters that I didn't even realize were missing, like Kara and Ares, not to mention Lobo, Sinestro, Kyle Rayner, the Green Lantern of my childhood. The main thing with this story is how the stakes were raised so high. The infection suddenly went from being contained on Earth for the whole series to suddenly threatening the entire universe. And there was more of the very sensitive stuff that I really enjoyed in the series. The Kents being reunited, Alfred's guilt. I was happy to see Alfred get with Leslie. And for a second, For the first time, I thought the characterizations felt a little off, that the characters weren't behaving like themselves, but it turned out they were being influenced by Ares. So in the end, I had noticed an inconsistency that was put there on purpose, so it was just good writing. Something I haven't touched on enough is how much Tom Taylor likes combining powers or items in this series. It started in the very first story when Black Canary gets Hal Jordan's ring after he gets infected, and there's something like this in basically every volume. It's a fun thing to play around with that there's more chance to do in Elseworld stories like this, and normally I'm not sure I would even want it, but it was cool here, and it makes sense. If a character gets killed and they have some magic item, you wouldn't just let that slip out of your hands, you'd try to utilize it still. And that was fun. It also gives characters that are dead kind of still a presence. Finally, in the last volume, there's this big callback because Damian took up the role of becoming Batman after Bruce dies in the first story. And at the end, when Damian is sacrificing himself to stop the entity that is behind all of this, I realized, just before it was explicitly stated in the story, that we had come back full circle to something Green Arrow had said in the first story, that Batman shouldn't die this way, he should die sacrificing himself to save the universe or something like that. When that happened in the first story, it just felt like the Green Arrow was in some kind of denial. It's the kind of moment that I came across quite often reading Elseworld stories from Marvel. Like in Old Man Logan, there's a bit where Hawkeye and Logan are talking about that it's a mystery what happened to Reed and Sue of the Fantastic Four, and maybe they'll come back, which just feels like dangling false hope in front of us. Later, there was a writer that sort of fixed that, but in the original volume that's intended to just be a false hope, kind of pointing out that these stories are stupid or something like this. Old Man Logan is mean-spirited. But so in DCeased, this comes full circle when Damian now as Batman is fulfilling what Green Arrow said in that first volume, that this is how Batman should go out, is sacrificing himself to, it should be glorious, you know, not just sort of sad. At this point, I figure you catch my drift about this series. Comparing this to Marvel Zombies is inevitable, as is comparing it to DC's series Blackest Night, but the fundamental reason DCeased isn't like Marvel Zombies is because DCeased is still, at heart, a superhero story. Sure, there are sacrifices, casualties, tragedies, but at the end of the day, the heroes stand up against impossible odds and risk everything for ideals, for those weaker than themselves, and come out the other side. And without those elements, why feature superheroes in a zombie story?
We will protect you.
I wrote most of this script quite a while ago, and I was quite dissatisfied with it because, unlike Marvel Zombies, I didn't feel like I was contributing anything to the conversation. Most of what I have to say about this is praise. Basically, this series just did everything that I wanted Marvel Zombies to be. What made me come back to this script and decide to actually make this video was because of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. I don't play video games anymore, but sometimes I like to watch Let's Plays, and that was rough. It's extra tragic because not only is this a version of Batman that the player has guided through several games, this was almost the last time Kevin Conroy voiced Batman. If I was an executive on this project, I'd like to think that I would have rewritten this to show more respect for Kevin Conroy's passing. Thank goodness this got rectified by his actual final performance as Batman in Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 3.
And if it has to end, at least I go out like this, being Batman.
That game reminded me of how well DCeased handled the passing of so many characters, as well as the survival of so many characters, and that it's also important to voice our praise for things, not just our dissatisfaction. Anyway, this is all just my opinion. Let me know yours down in the comments, hit subscribe, like, all those buttons if you want to, or leave me here in YouTube oblivion. And I'll see you next time.